they'll stay, they're compliant. But unless you reset your licenses, you don't know whether that's the optimal, whether, there are other things I can do. And so, even when we're running ServiceNow SAM Pro, let's say, or Snow for one of our clients, we're not just taking what the tool says, we're doing these manual.
Welcome to the first series of the Off Menu IT podcast. I'm your host, Sean Ashbury, and in this episode, we are focused on MetrixData 360's ITAM solution, which is one of 9 episodes that you can enjoy this season. This episode was recorded on the 30th of October, and some of the proposed announcements may have already been released. This podcast is fully independent and does not accept payments from its guests. The mission is to help the ITAM community make better decisions through their own discovery. Let this maximize your IT budgets and improve your RFP process. In this episode, we have Mike Austin, the CEO and founder of MetrixData 360.
All right, welcome, Mike, and thank you so much for taking time to join the podcast. Mike's story is quite unique, and I'll let him tell and explain why. But Mike, first of all, started in Microsoft, learning all the tricks of the trade, per se, and realized he wanted to help people. Mike's journey into software asset management is quite personal and unique. And to be honest, I think it's better introduced by himself. Mike, what happened? And I guess at what age and how did Sam find you?
Well, Sam found me, well, the startings of it was while I was at Microsoft, but it really, for me, it's a little bit more personal than that, in that I grew up in a small town in Canada, and my mom was actually an IT manager at a manufacturing facility. And I remember, being fairly young, I don't even know if I was 13 at the time, but, kind of in and around there. And my mom was kind of more stressed than normal. And I started to realize that they were threatening to close the plant and move it to Mexico, actually. And I know she was working very hard, and this is in the 80s, software contracts and SaaS and all of that. But I know she was working really hard with her vendors, trying to cut costs in order to save the plant and save jobs. And, just being frustrated in the conversations that she was having with her vendors at that time. And I remember actually sitting at the table one night, and she came home and went straight to her bedroom, and that was not normal. Normally she would, how was your day? What's going on at school? Yeah. And I could hear her crying, and I knew that was the day they closed the plant. And so, I joined Microsoft in my early 20s and was doing really well there. Actually, a lot of the programs that are in market today, I was on design teams for, and I was getting pulled into Redmond to help with that stuff.
Awesome.
Because some of the things that we were doing, we were leading the world in like EA renewal rates and revenue attach rates and all these things. And so they were having me go down to Redmond to teach other licensing people, how we were doing it or what could be done. And I remember in 2008, I found myself not being able to sleep. And really what happened was, by this time I'd moved out of licensing and I was supporting automotive accounts. And, at that time, the economic downturn had hit, and all these guys, GM, Ford, they were flying down to Washington begging for money to save their companies and save jobs. And my management team was like, Mike, you need to go and sell 20% more to them this year. And I was like, hold on, they're laying off 30% of their workforce. They're going to Washington, looking for money to save their companies. And you want me to sell 20% more. And I was literally told more or less that if I didn't do it, I wasn't a good sales rep, and I wasn't a team player.
Okay.
And the worst part for me, Sean, was I knew I could do it. I knew I could go and figure out, the games that these software companies play. I knew I could figure out a way to do it, but ethically I was misaligned with my personal values. And so that's when, the writing on the wall started. And I did end up landing at a systems integrator selling software before I started, what is MetrixData 360 now. But when I did start it, it really was focused on, in some ways writing what I feel were my wrongs, right? Like,
so it looks like it.
I negotiated $1 billion of contracts or more when I was at Microsoft. Now my mission in life is to help my clients save $1 billion. And a lot of that is really, I called the company MetrixData 360 for a reason. A lot of what we do is driven on data. So when I first started Metrix, again, it was prior to cloud and things like that. But I knew when I was at Microsoft that we knew more about our clients than they knew about themselves. And I used to sort of joke all the time. It's like, why is every enterprise agreement 10,000? It's, 52,000. It's never 9,632. You know what I mean? Like, and it was because people were doing one of two things. They were guessing at what they needed, to be honest, and they were typically rounding up to avoid being audited. And, I knew that you could leverage that to your advantage when I was there. And it just didn't seem right. So when I started the company, we really were heavily focused on going in and helping people understand, what do you actually have in use, so that instead of buying 10,000, you'll maybe only need to buy 8,142, right? And let me show you what that is. And let's not focus so much on, because back then, a lot of organizations, particularly bigger companies, were focused on, trying to get a few percentage points discount off of Microsoft, then calling it a day. That game's changed quite significantly over the years, but back then it was like, if I can get a few points discount off of this thing, I feel good about it and I'll move forward. But, if you go back into those days, 10, 15 years ago, Microsoft was a smaller percentage of the IT budget than it is today. And so the stakes are just so much higher.
Thanks so much for very detailed. I mean, it's amazing to obviously hear that it was a personal journey for you, that most people's software asset management introductions come from, they were asked by Joe Bloggs to look at something whilst they were already in a job, and then they just kind of fell into it. You had this personal feelings, you went into Microsoft maybe to kind of to change the game, and then you realized where there was an opportunity for you in Metrix 360 through seeing the fact that you knew more than those who you were selling it to, and you've now armed your customers with that information and that understanding. So is that specifically where you realized that you had that kind of unique and valuable offering within the market compared to others?
I mean, I think so. I mean, like, if I really look back at the history, because we really started as an organization helping on Microsoft contract renewals. Now we do, everything right up to managed software, managed SAM services, right? But when I first started out, I think, I thought that was part of it was, understanding how licensing worked, but actually going out and doing that dive into what was on the network or what were on the desktops back in the day, and kind of saying, like, why are you buying all this stuff that you're not using? Let's get rid of shelfware. Like, I think I was looking at that probably prior to most people even realizing it was a thing, right? And I think where it really solidified for me was we had a client that was getting audited. They were in an audit with again, that's a Microsoft example. We'll probably start talking about some other vendors here in a little bit, but it's another Microsoft example. And this is one of my, first early on clients. And I remember very direct communication. We'd done an email blast out, said, hey, if you're getting audited, we can help you. And I got a response that was, prove it, call me right now. Right. With a phone number. And so anyways, I called this gentleman up, and he'd literally just walked out of an audit meeting, and where he was told that they owned a little over $10 million. And they'd been fighting this audit for almost a year and a half at this point. And he's like, we know we don't owe this, but we just can't figure out how to prove otherwise. Right. And so, long story short, we went in and helped them inside of 6 weeks take that from $10 million to $750,000.
6 weeks reduced
6
from
weeks.
10 million to
750,000. Yeah. And back then, like, it was a really manual thing. Like, if you've ever seen a license position from any of these vendors, I mean, there's these spreadsheets that have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of rows of data, and these customers get confused and not sure even where to start. And this was a large organization. I mean, they have 100,000 plus employees. And when I started looking at it, I knew what I needed to do was really dive in and look at that data and figure out, okay, where are the assumptions? Where are the bad assumptions? Where is the data just wrong? And so I remember literally I was like going to a conference. I remember literally sitting in the back of a taxi, going to an Oracle Open World conference and going through, 500,000 rows of Active Directory manually to find duplicate users and things like that. Right. And so, it really, that's where it really solidified for me. Right. Was look at the results that we got, how quickly we were able to do it, taking this data centric approach, really understanding the data itself. But where it really cemented was when they phoned me 4 weeks later and said, Mike, we're getting audited by Adobe now. Can you come in and defend us through this Adobe audit? And I was like, at the time, I was only Microsoft. And I said, remember saying, I can spell Adobe. I don't know anything, I don't know anything about their licensing, all of that sort of stuff. And the client said, Mike, no, you don't understand. That process that you just went through with Microsoft is what we need and what we want. What you don't know about Adobe is 10 times more than what we don't know about Adobe. And we want that process, come and run that process again. And we did the same thing with Adobe, And that's when I knew I was onto something.
It goes back to what you mentioned at the start. I mean, the underlying factor is that your customers have no idea or had no idea. Obviously, it has progressed since. You are better placed to provide this process or to introduce this process that you've created, and works. And it's not just Microsoft, is it? It is Adobe, it's Oracle. And what else have you? What else have you added to the
Adobe,
arsenal?
Oracle, IBM, VMware, AWS? It's pretty much everything nowadays. The thing that we don't do a lot of, although we do it, it's just not a lot of big focus is when you get into industry specific stuff. Like, you look at healthcare management systems or HR systems, things like that. So we don't tend to do a lot of work there. But having said that, it's the process, right? It's understanding, when I bring somebody on, I always say, like, look, really what it is at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? At the end of the day, you have a licensing contract that has licensing metrics, and you have data that you need to go in order to figure out how many of those licensing metrics you need to buy, basically. So how do we go get that data, and how do we look at those licensing metrics? And if it's a software that has multiple licensing metrics, don't stop with just the one that they're buying. If they haven't bought, like, I'll give you an example here, Sean, just to emphasize what I'm talking about. We recently helped a university with an IBM audit, and they were offside a fair bit. And when we went in and we looked at it, we realized that they were licensing everything based on processor value units or PVUs. But when we analyzed their environment, and they'd been doing that for years, 10 years, it was Cognos. They've been doing it for 10 years that way. And when we went in and analyzed their environment, we're like, hold on, you've got a production environment, you have a dev environment, you have 30 people in your dev environment that you're putting PVUs that cost $500,000 on, when you can just go out and buy brand new $30,000 of user licenses and not even have to worry about those PVUs, shuffle those over to your production environment, and we get rid of this compliance issue for, $30,000 instead of $500,000 or whatever it was. Right. But the reason that we were able to do that is we don't get stuck in looking at just what they have. We look at what are all the opportunities. And I think in the SAM world in general, to be honest, this is a big part of the problem. Is it's what I refer to as set and forget. So a lot of people go out, they'll get a SAM tool, they'll put the licenses in, it'll say they're compliant, they'll run a reconciliation, it'll say they're compliant. But unless you reset your licenses, you don't know whether that's the optimal, whether, there are other things I can do. And so, even when we're running ServiceNow SAM Pro, let's say, or Snow for one of our clients, we're not just taking what the tool says. We're doing these manual, requires people look every year to make sure that is still the right way, because the world changes, right? The way their environment changes and all that sort of stuff. So it really is, a lot of expertise required to do this stuff, but it's a lot of fun.
And that's, one of my questions was going to be, is you obviously mentioned your process. and the understanding of where to look. Is that down to the people that you've employed and the training and mentoring that you provided, or is it a case of the process and you have a checks and balances in place?
It's a little bit of all of it. And it's also some software that we've wrote, right? So we have, we've developed some internal tools that we use that aren't really commercial. They're just used in our products. We do have a commercial tool, but that really helps on M365 and Azure and AWS. But some of this stuff, just, like I can give you an example, right?
Please.
When you take Active Directory, right? In order to figure out, the first thing you do in an audit is, are all my devices inventory? Well, where do they start? They're going to go and start at Active Directory. What's active in the directory? And do I have inventory on it? Now I say, think of it as a simple Venn diagram. It's active in AD. I have inventory. I want 90 to 95% overlap there. And then I can probably move forward. If I have less than that, don't even move forward. Go figure out why I don't have 95%, right? Well, when I tell people that an audit starts with Active Directory, most organizations have a look of fear on their, on their faces, because Active Directory is not clean. And if I go back even to that audit that we saved them $10 million, I was literally going through 500,000 lines of Excel spreadsheets, trying to figure that out. So we wrote some custom code and some custom logic that we take in an AD set, and at the snap of a button, we come back and say, we believe you have this many active employees and this many active devices, servers, desktops, whatnot. Is this close to what you believe? Right. And then we just clean it up from there. Right. And that right there, that is one of the that is a fundamental difference of what I do. I do not see many organizations do that, but that is getting good data quality. So even if I take it and look at like ServiceNow, for instance, in the SAM space, a lot of people are buying SAM Pro, and they're just basically saying, I'm going to turn this on and I'm going to get these great ELPs. I'm going to save all this money because my ServiceNow sales team told me so, right? Well, think about it. SAM Pro works from taking the CMDB and converting it to software tables that you then go and do software asset management work on. Well, if we were in a room of 100 people that were managing CMDBs and said, what do you think the data quality is on your CMDB? 80% of them are going to say 60% or less. So they magically think that I take something that I have 60% confidence in, and then I can have 100% confidence in a license position it created. It doesn't make any sense. So that data cleansing process for us now, like even you take Active Directory, for us, we've also created a data cleansing process for ServiceNow to make sure that the CMDB has data quality, to ensure that if I'm looking at, say, Microsoft, the licensing metrics that I'm looking for at 90, that I need, the data that I need to look at that is at 90 to 95%.
Sure.
So I don't have guest to host relationships and processors and cores and all that sort of stuff. There's no point moving forward, let alone doing, software normalization, right? So, where that comes into play for clients, right, is we had a big client on ServiceNow. They were doing their SQL true-ups every year through a manual process. They would strike up a team 8 to 9 months before their true-up was due. And every year their true-ups were 7 to 8 figures on SQL Server alone. We came in, we started a data quality journey with them. And in the first year, we took that process from a team of 10 and 8 months to a team of 2 people validating our data in 4 weeks. And for the first time ever, they had a true-up in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right. And it was, it was all data thing. And so, now all we do is every month we got a data quality process on their thing. We go and say, here's some issues in your CMDB. And then we'll go work with their teams to fix that, so that at any point in time, they want to see where they're at a snap of a button. We can tell them, right? And we can tell them with, a good level of confidence that this is going to be correct.
And it's not rocket science what you're implementing, is it? I mean, it's
just
going
hard.
extremely deep dive onto the correct. So I mean, I'm not saying it's not hard, but you are deep diving onto the data, and that's your first part. And that's how, I guess, how do you compare to your competitors? I mean, do you see your competitors doing an equally as deep dive forensic approach as Metrix 360?
I have not. I mean, we've gone in after many of our competitors and still found stuff because of the process that we take, right? And that's what I mean. Like when I first started, when I first started out coming from Microsoft, I just knew people didn't have the data, and so that's why we take this very data centric approach, right? So even like if I take and look at like a more modern example, because we've been talking a lot about like on premise and sort of the old stuff, and so that stuff's still very relevant, right? But you take like O365 today, right? Think about how much money people are spending on Office 365. If I go into an organization and say, okay, you've got an M365 E5, how much of that are you using? They don't even know how to answer it, right? But I've got tooling that we've developed that I can go in and look at 80% of the 80 some odd services that make up an E5 and tell you to an individual level who's using and who's not using, right? And so where that comes into play is you start to look at, like we just finished an organization, we just pulled $1.2 million out of not even their renewal. They're on an anniversary date. We just pulled $1.2 million out of about a 7,000 person organization because we went in and started analyzing, and I was able to see, hey, because we do tagging and all kinds of fun stuff right? But, one of the things I went to them, I said, I see you guys have 1,000 contractors. And they're like, yep. I said, how would you like to know what your contractors are using? They said, what do you mean? I said, well, you're giving them all E5s. How would you like to know what they're actually using? And what ended up happening is 80% of them weren't even logging into email, SharePoint, OneDrive, not using the Office license. So they were just coming in as guests. Right. So we were able to show them that and, reclaim all those licenses.
And just quick, I mean, how long did that take? So 7,000 person organization. I mean, how long did it take for you to get to that baseline of data to then work back and implement your tool and then create those savings?
It took us 4 weeks to get to the point
4
where we
weeks.
had the confidence in the data to tell them these things. Now it takes them a lot longer, right?
Yep.
Because
100%.
you kind of put yourself in their shoes. There's two things that happens when you go to an organization and say things. Like when we start showing them things, first off, they go through this, I don't believe you, right? Because it just can't, we haven't been wasting all this money. I don't believe you, right? And so we have to get over that hurdle with them, which is usually fairly easy because you just start showing them data, right? But then the next thing is it's the change management process that they have to go through, right? Because they don't want to have end user interruption and what if we're wrong. And so all that doubt starts to creep in. So, you just need to make sure you work through the process. So I would say it probably took them 3 to 4 months to get to the point where, yes, we can do this. In fact, we actually identified this for them last year. They didn't quite believe us. And then we said, okay, fine, let's strike up a project about 6 months from your anniversary date and let's get this stuff out. But that's kind of the way that it typically works. But we've seen all kinds of things. Like I've got customers where it's like, oh, all our employees use email. And I'm like, hey, you got 3,000 employees that don't use email. I don't believe you. And then they phone and it's like, they phone a business manager. Business manager's like, yeah, no, all my guys do is they got a tablet that they go out to a pipeline and weld it. And the tablet tells them which mile marker to go out in the desert or what, you know what I mean? Like and they're like, wow, like, we just figured everybody used it. And I'm like, nope, the data shows, right? So, but that becomes so powerful, right? Because think about what Microsoft is doing, right? So they're increasing prices.
Yep.
If you
Monthly.
are already on, decreasing discounts, bringing out new functionality that they used to would have put into their top bundles and calling them premium SKUs now and charging you more money for that new functionality. And so if you're an IT department, did you budget 40, 50% increase on your Microsoft renewal? Highly unlikely, right? So the only way that you're going to be able to, come close is to really look at your usage and almost step backwards. Now, the biggest obstacle then becomes people are like, well, you're making it more complicated for me. I got to manage all these license profiles. And the short answer is no. Like, I think that is almost an excuse that people want to use because if you have the data, it's very easy to do. Like, if you think about it, if I can tell you that just job description gets this license and then you go create an onboarding process or a license management in your, Okta or SailPoint or whatever, it's fairly straightforward. It's just, it's the confidence that they need to do those sorts of things.
If you're enjoying listening to this episode, please show your support and take this short break to like and subscribe to this series and beyond. one more thing. If you know someone who could benefit from this episode, share the love and share this episode. Thank you.
You touched on something there in Gartner. They mentioned one of the number one issues for companies is being ill prepared for the negotiations, leaving thousands and, well, in this case you just mentioned there, millions, 1.2 million on the table. You mentioned that ill prepared with the data. So you obviously have touched on it. The product Slim 360 is something that you are doing something about that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that tool?
Yeah. So it's purpose built to do license and cost optimization, right? So if you look at most of the SAM tools on market, I think most of the SAM tools, this is probably generalization, but I'll use this. I think most of the SAM tools that are in market are really more around governance stuff. In other words, identifying where things are than doing true cost optimization. They have little pieces where you can do cost optimization, but it's not their strength. It's not what they were built for. And so Slim was built to really do license and cost optimization for O365 and Azure to begin with. We're launching AWS in January. And it's been built with FinOps in mind, right? So if you take the FinOps framework, it's built around the FinOps framework. But like I said, it's really built around license and cost optimization. So what does that mean? So if you look at our competitors and if you look at what I would say are the traditional tools in market, they're going to tell you, oh, you got blocked users, disabled users that you're paying for, kind of the low hanging fruit. But they're not really able to dive into that usage. Like I said, when you take a look at, the 80 some odd services that make up an E5, and you can look to see, are your users actually taking advantage of these and using it? Now I can do real license optimization, right? So to me, cost optimization, is almost like the baseline given. You have to be able to say there's disabled users and things like that. But the power in our tooling comes into this discussion that I just had. Like if I can show you that, you got a bunch of frontline workers that you think need E5s, but I can show you they're not actually using devices. They're not using Office. I can move them over to F5s with data so that you can make that shift and know that there's no impact to your end user. Then you have the confidence to make that switch, right? But if I just come and say, hey, your organization, you got a ton of frontline workers. Why do you have so many E5s? You're going to go, everybody's got desktop or they all need Office or whatever it is, right? And so when we can show you with data, then you can make those decisions, right? And then when you add into that the power of things like tagging and being able to do show back, chargebacks, all that sort of stuff, it really takes off, right? So an organization owns a bunch of hospitals, and we can show them like, hey, hospital A and hospital B are similar size. This one's spending $50 a month a user. This one's spending $30 a month a user. Now, the thought usually is, why is the $50 a month one, why are they spending 50 and these guys are spending 30 on Microsoft? Well, the $50 a month one's actually more efficient than the 30, because the 30, I can then go and show they have all this other software that they're using where they're not paying 30 a user, they're paying 80 a user for what these guys are doing at 50. So now I can do some benchmarking and, fun stuff like that as well, right? So.
And I'm guessing on that particular project, they did believe you, and you didn't have to wait 6 months because you had a direct.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, like, this is where you get to, like, you don't get to this spot right out of the box. Like, these are customers that we've worked with for, years or a couple of years and things like that, right? Like, because usually what you start with is, I find when most people start out, they start with the Gartner says we can save 20% if we do software asset management. And my answer to that is, can you? Right? Like, and it's like, what does 20% mean to you, right? Like, is it off your budget? Is it off of some list price on some software renewal? Like, let's make sure we're tracking the right thing first so that we're successful, right? But that's where most people start. So they're going to go after the low hanging fruit. Like, what licenses aren't we using? Can we reclaim? So, and that's what they're really looking for. But once you get to that, then there can become some real power in what you can do as a business with this sort of data.
Brilliant. I guess that's the big thing, isn't it? You are aware of the low-hanging fruit, but also with this, say, the tool that you provided, you can go even deeper. So yeah, a lot of value that Metrix 360 can offer. So as far as the biggest challenge that you see today in the industry, I appreciate we touched on being ill-prepared and not understanding what the baseline is. But in your opinion, what do you think one of the biggest challenges are there today for your customers and future customers?
I kind of look at it, part of it is data. Obviously, like data is going to be definitely one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest, especially the quality of data. The quantity of data is becoming problematic as well. But I think honestly, if I look at the industry in general, I would probably say that one of the biggest problems is there's just a lack of skills in this stuff. And I've brought on, SAM people that have been in, at vendors as a SAM practitioner, worked at other competitors, and we bring them in, and 2 years later, they're still like, this is the biggest learning curve I've ever had. Right. And, so I do think that it's a skill thing. I think that a challenge with a lot of SAM as well is misalignment in what the program's trying to do. Right. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to put in a SAM program, why are you putting it in? Right. And making sure you understand what that is. And saving money may be one of the things, but there's lots of other reasons. And so what I end up finding is a lot of, especially when we go into a client that has a program that's failing, usually it starts with data. The second thing is they put in a tool thinking it was going to solve the problem. And then the third is the people, right? And the challenge for people is a lot of the times they're stuck in what I would say is almost like the governance side of SAM. They want to try and count and account for things, right? Like, hey, that was on Mike's desktop, now it's on Sean's. How do we account for that? And I think that, quite honestly, that's a big miss in the industry. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, and that, I describe it like this. If you get audited by a vendor, right, and they create a license position, they're going to create a spreadsheet that basically says, you've deployed this many, you own this many, here's your overages and here's your underages, right? Do they really care that you've assigned licenses to 3,000 machines, or do they just care that you have 3,000 licenses? Right. And so the problem that I find is everybody's trying to assign to all these machines and make it this static thing when it's really not. It should I vision it almost like it should be a floating thing that just floats there and says, we need 3,000. We got 3,000. I remember back in the day when, introducing client access licenses to customers, and they used to be like, do I need to do anything with these things? I used to just kind of jokingly say, go into the serverware room and say, I declare you user kills. Like, kind of half-heartedly joking, because, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like it needs to be attributed to a physical user or a device or whatever, right? So, I think that those are the fundamental roots of it, and it's challenging, right? And I think, just problem-solving skills are in a shortage as well in this industry. Like, I describe it all the time. Like, what happens is, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, it's part. I mean, just to kind of weigh in there. I mean, obviously we're recruiting for many of the industry's top consultancies. I mean, there's no one size sort of fits all approach to any enterprise that they are servicing, and there's also no rather streamlined services that they all provide. They're all different, and they're all structured differently.
Yeah,
I know some organizations that are very focused on the forensic aspect of it, but not necessarily dive deeper into the where and the how it's got to that point. And equally, there's some organizations that I know of that silo each part of the solution they provide. So, but there's not that end-to-end solution, which I guess from the way that you're talking, that's very much ingrained in every Metrics 360 consultant. And that's why that steep learning curve is potentially here.
Yeah, because and the way we approach things as well is, like, I tell people all the time, like, you just think about, if I have a slide, we call it the blue slide insert, and really it's like one slide that I use to say, here's everything we do, right? And if I simply describe it, you have to go get inventory, and that's a skill set in itself. There's tooling and understanding. You have to normalize that inventory. That's a skill set in itself, because it's not just normalizing software publishers and titles and things like that. It's, do I have all the processors, cores, like everything that you need in order to count licenses? And that also means things that aren't inventoriable, HR counts and things like that. And maybe, amounts of data storage they're using, whatever it is. And then you have to understand license metrics, and you have to understand contracts. right? And so if you take it and break it down into those 4 pieces, it's very rare that you're going to find anybody that can understand all 4 of those to any level of depth, right? And then when you layer on the nuances of IBM versus Oracle versus, you know what I mean? Like it just compounds, right?
Is there a training program that you have within your business for the new starters, or is there quite heavily kind of mentor? Is there a big push for mentoring within the business? I mean, how do you keep your consultants to up their game if they're not quite there, and how do you keep them at the top of their game?
Yeah, I mean that's everybody's challenge, but yeah, you know, it's there's a little bit of everything. There's training, there's mentoring, there's cross training, right? So if we bring in somebody that maybe is an IBM licensing expert, what skills that they have that can be transferable into one of those other things? And the way we approach things is almost like I call it the strategic SAM business unit. We call it internally. We don't use that externally, but when we do a project, our clients don't get one person. They get a team. Now, sometimes they don't see that team, right? But on our team, we're going to have an inventory specialist, a normalization, a contract, a vendor licensing specialist, a finance specialist, somebody that understands the financial aspects. We don't have lawyers on staff, but we do have people that understand software contracts and how those work. And so that's what I tell people all the time. Like when you say, like Gartner says that, they're ill prepared. One of the things is they don't really understand the team that's required in order to be successful against these vendors, right? And it's not like it used to be, hey, this was negotiated by somebody in IT. Maybe we had a procurement person that would take some of the commercial pieces of it, but IT would figure out what's needed. It's no longer that simple, right? Like you need multiple people, like on a Microsoft project in a bigger client, like they got a renewal, there can be 10, 15 stakeholders on Microsoft, just because you think about how pervasive that is, and getting them all marching to the same tune and saying the same thing is an art to itself, but mislooked a lot of the times because they'll just go and say, okay, we got a renewal coming up. We should prepare 6 to 9 months early. Hey, Sean, you won the renewal, off to the races you go. And then you're running all over the place trying to figure out who, what, why, and then at the end, you just throw up your hands and go, I'm just going to buy whatever they tell us because I can't figure this out. Right? And, I tell people.
And I'm guessing was that a tactic you used back in 2008?
It's still a tactic used today, right? They all use it, right? Like, but, like if you look at Microsoft, I don't know how much they use it internally anymore, but they used to have what they called T-36 playbook. And EA's 36 months, they had things that they needed to do every month in the 36 months. And I think customers were looking at renewals and Microsoft EAs as this one-time thing that I do it once every year or once every 3 years, and I need about 9 months to prepare. And I'm throwing out guidance here in the next couple of weeks that I believe that you should be actively managing your EA for 36 months. And I'm going to give guidance to a client on what they should be doing for 36 months, because it's no longer like you think about perpetual licenses. I couldn't true down. Well, with it's O365, I can, right? So if I'm overpaying because I didn't know when I signed my contract last year, that doesn't mean I need to overpay for the next 2 years.
Yep.
There's things that I can do, right? And so you have to be managing that. Like even, we have clients on Slim that we're actively managing, and we still have things like this happen. Like, hey, we noticed you just made 500 reservations. Remember those 1,000 licenses that we told you that were blocked that you could go and free up? Why'd you make the reservations? Like, we're in the return frame. Let's return those and go on. You know what I mean? So like, it's just people are busy. They don't, they don't have time and they forget. And so, you have to be doing things proactively. All right.
It's always been everyone I speak to internally or consulting, it's always an educational thing, isn't it? I mean, you need to hammer down the point, and you need to also make sure that people are aware constantly of essentially what software asset management is and all the tricks and all and the way you're moving it around. Because they say people are busy, but obviously people like yourself can highlight that and do highlight that.
Yeah, and I think too, like it's becoming more important. Like you look at the industry, like look at Broadcom buying VMware and what's happening. I mean, it's not uncommon that we're hearing 500, 600%. I think there's one in the press right now that is going to court that's like over 1,500% price increase on their VMware environment, right? Yeah, and so like if you're coming up for renewal in the next 6, 9 months or even year, even if you said we want to do something about it technically, there's no way it's going to happen. Right. So what can you do? You're going to have to go in and look at data and go and say, are we inefficient? Which you probably are. And can we become more efficient so that we can decrease the number of cores that we need to license in order to save money? Because it's going to be the only thing we can do because they're not going to negotiate. Right. And so again, that goes right back to that data view. Right. So it's you have to not only understand what you have going on. You have to understand what's going on in the industry and what, these publishers are doing and, all that night. Like I tell people all the time, like, who's auditing right now? And do you have them in your environment? Because if you do, it's a good chance they're going to come knocking, right? So you're proactive around that.
And you mentioned it means 36 months. 36 months is quite a long time with
Mhm.
all of these changes. So how are you road mapping the DAs of 36 months? Is it all brought from the tool constantly evaluating the environment and
There's
providing information, or sort of how?
there's pieces of it, right? But
Okay.
like there's also other things, like even just simple things like how you managing your relationship with them, right? It's so like we'll see things like let's just take Copilot. Let's say I signed a deal. And Copilot is probably not the best example for this, but I'll use it anyways. I signed a deal, didn't have Copilot in it. 18 months later, we want Copilot. We just go and add it, and we're paying list price, right? Because we're not managing it in any strategic manner. And so we see that all the time. Whether it's Power Apps would have probably been a better example where they didn't put Power Apps in, then all of a sudden they have a project where it's like, okay, we need Power Apps. Let's just go buy it, and they're paying list price when, they could have done things where they could have got 50% off if they had thought it through a little bit, maybe, right? Because there's promos that Microsoft has that you could see that potentially, right? So, that's just an example of, it's not just about what the tool's saying and how you're cleaning things up and keeping them optimized. What's the relationship look like? What are you planning on doing? Did you buy stuff? We bought the E5 because we're going to displace 2 or 3 security vendors. Are you tracking that you're actually displacing those? Are you having conversations with Microsoft about how they can help with that? All those sorts of things as well.
Taking control, I guess,
Yeah.
is as opposed to waiting for the salesman, saleswoman to come to you and tell you the latest deal in Copilot, and then you say jump on it. Is you are obviously always planning for these changes and you're taking control. I guess that's kind of a very basic way of describing what you suggested there.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you mentioned that AI Copilot. Obviously, a very big part of the way things are going across all businesses. And so, how is Metrix positioning themselves to adapt or potentially lead on these changes and within your service?
I mean, we're definitely watching AI. There's elements of AI that we're building in. Like I think things like chatbots are going to be, a good example of where they could go. I'm a little probably more hesitant than some others in our industry around that sort of functionality, and just because I played with it and I'm not happy with the results and the, few too many errors that can lead to millions of dollars of issues.
Or back down
But
to the data.
yeah, but there are lots of areas that I think that it can be very helpful, right? Like here, I can give you an example. IT people typically don't like to negotiate. Right? I can use things like ChatGPT to help me draft stronger emails and better emails if I learn how to use that tool to, go back and push on my Microsoft sales team or my IBM sales team or my Oracle sales team. Or I don't know how to ask correctly. I'm hesitant, or I don't know how to ask for an escalation to a VP. And even if I do escalate to a VP, what would I talk to them about? Well, these tools know who those VPs are and what their priorities are. And, if you feed it the right information, it can tell you how to go ask for that and how to structure that conversation to hopefully be successful. So I think there's lots of uses for it. I'm a little bit more hesitant on the sort of practical applications in SAM itself. It will come, right? But I think we're still a few years away from that. I can tell you, it helps us a lot in terms of like some of the data crunching that we need to do in the formulas. It's like, I don't know how to write this formula, and you just drop in ChatGPT. I need to write, and then So those sorts of things. I think productivity enhancers, for sure, first and foremost, right? So
It's brilliant that you've already given a takeaway from here, and in that someone can use ChatGPT to rephrase their email for for the negotiations, as you mentioned, or even it's always good to hear something. I mean, I use it to script my emails and for research. So to be able to place it into your world and for our listeners who are the ITAM centric listeners to be able to take that away with them, that's fantastic.
yeah, so I think giving like another example of where it's helpful too. It's like if I got a software contract and I want to know if it has a clause and I don't want to read 20 pages, I can drop it in and go, is there a disaster recovery clause and what does it state? So like I said, like it's just, or I could put a couple in and go, compare these two, I explain the differences so that if I'm negotiating a contract, I can maybe take two different vendors, kind of figure out what they're doing to know what to go and ask a third vendor for, right? So, there's lots of practical applications that you can use it for if you learn, if you learn how to use it, right?
And from there, that is the data that is the endpoint, isn't it? You're comparing two documents. It's not reliant on ChatGPT to have an understanding of a software license agreement and also the metrics and how it's done. So yeah, that's good. And so what can we expect from metrics? I appreciate you've already mentioned the tool that you've already got going and happening, providing value to your customers. But is there anything else that we can kind of expect for metrics to be releasing or to focus on in the coming months, years?
Yeah, I mean, we're really focused, if you look at our core business, we're really focused on helping people drive cost out of license. And that's my number one mission is to save companies. I got to right my $1 billion wrong, as I said earlier, right? But, so we're going to continue to focus on that, but you're going to see incremental improvements on our offerings, right? So for instance, the Slim tool was just O365 in Azure, adding AWS into it, the coming, the new year here. And we're building up more like FinOps offerings as well. So FinOps is a service. So if you don't want to do the cost optimization on Azure AWS, we'll do that for you. So I think those are a couple of the newer things that we have coming up. The one area that we're seeing a lot of opportunity in and where we're really helping organizations is around ServiceNow SAM Pro, making that work, right? I find a lot of people say they're SAM Pro experts, but what that means is they can install SAM Pro, but they couldn't spell license if they needed to, unfortunately. And so, where people have made big investments in the ServiceNow platform as a strategic tool to the business, we're enabling the SAM Pro module to do the things that they need it to do. And I think that's something that you're going to see a big splash for us coming out here in the new year as well.
Brilliant. And I guess it goes back to that skills shortage with the ServiceNow. I mean, having reviewed the North American market specifically, that they're very heavy on ServiceNow implementations.
It's going to be interesting to see, because I think, if you look at what ServiceNow strategy was, as you said, in North America, I don't know if it was like this in Europe or the rest of the world, but it was here, renew, I'll discount SAM Pro heavily. And then all those things are going to come up for renewal where they either didn't implement or they were unsuccessful, and they're going to start trying to debook, which is not what ServiceNow is going to want. And so, our message to the market there really is, you invested in this to get an ROI and you're not getting that ROI. Let us come in and help you actually get that ROI, and we'll show you how it can be done. Some of it can be done in the tool, some of it can't, but let's make it work for you, right? And we'll make that work.
So now we're at the final stage of the podcast, where we are asking Mike to provide some takeaways for the listeners. So Mike, what is a takeaway that Metrics and 360 can offer?
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, we have a monthly webinar series, and in that series, I don't hold back. I basically share, what I know out to the community, right? And I think actually that's one thing that we do a little bit different than others as well. I've had people tell me, don't share the gold. I'll share all the gold. I'll tell you exactly how to do things, how it's done, because the value is not in the knowledge. The value is in the delivery and of the knowledge, right? And so, I would say if you're interested in SAM, you should be joining our our webinar series, we cover everything from software audits to tools to FinOps to, even technologies that we see that are new in the market that I think, would make sense in the FinOps SAM world, right? So, I would say check those out. The other thing that we offer as well is either a free or a low cost, depending on what you want to do. I call them a proof of value on our Slim tool, where we can connect in and take a look at what's going on in your environment and show you what is potentially possible in sort of a 30 to 90 day quick little proof of value to show you that there's a definite ROI to moving forward with the tool and the service that we wrap around.
Brilliant. And just so the listeners are aware, I mean, how is that installed into their environments, or do they even have to install anything?
So it's basically read-only access to the APIs in the O365 tenant is what it is.
Thank you. And obviously, final question here is that we can't give a takeaway without understanding what your takeaway is of choice. So what's your takeaway of choice, Mike?
It would be sushi, I would think. If I've got the time, I'm always up for a good sushi meal.
Yeah. Nice. Well, if you've got the time, is that because you make it yourself, or is it sitting at the chef's table and enjoying someone else make it for you?
Sitting at the chef's table and enjoying somebody else make it, for sure.
Well, thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate having you on the Off Menu podcast, and I'm sure the listeners enjoyed it too. So thanks again. Cheers.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've reached the end, and I hope you enjoyed that. If you want any further information about our guests, then their LinkedIn profile and contact information can be found in the episode notes. I do have one more section, which is a request for your involvement. I created this following multiple members of our community suggesting I should, and this is a community-driven platform that is created to help you. So if you know of any alternative solutions within our industry or related to the ITAM industry, I want to hear from you. Help me to interview those that you want to learn about. So please comment or reach out directly with your ideas. Let me help you to discover what is best for your environment. Finally, any feedback is welcomed. I really want to improve this podcast. The better this gets, the better the information you'll receive. So please help me to ask the questions that are relevant to you so you get the answers. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But please also share with your colleagues and industry peers if you feel it's relevant.